Hello, and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On this episode, I'm going to talk about a subject I wanted to get to for a while. I want to talk about empowered versus disempowered dynamics and relationships that are especially going strong now in the digital age. What it really means for us when we understand what our digital sexual identity is, especially in the era of Twitter and Facebook, fetish websites, Instagram, and so on and so forth. In the digital age, people are increasingly exploring and expressing their sexual identities online. This is never more prevalent now in places such as Fetish.com, FetLife, Alt.com. They get a chance to reveal the person who they really are, the things that really excite them in a sexual manner, and things that how they want to connect with other people's of certain kinks or sexual identities. The management and the development of these sexual identities, though, can provide opportunities of empowerment for the individual, even on an interpersonal level and as well at a societal level. At the same time, social media users are confronted with the risks of sexual disempowerment in the terms of identity devaluation and devalidation, social exclusion, discrimination, and even sometimes being criminalized. So when we look at these different things and we understand who we are and the imagery that we're putting online, it really starts to come into its own with the things that we're putting out there and whether or not how we're being judged, how this works for us, what people learn about us, how they follow us, how they perceive us, why we are doing it. They put it in terms of light our identities and how if we want to be more fluid or if we're more rigid. It's on a multifaceted, socio-technical level that this phenomenon is starting to grow with an inordinate amount of different outcomes, whether they are good, empowered, or on the bad end of the spectrum, disempowered. And that's where I want to kind of take the show and this discussion today. Every day, we're consistently bombarded by the thoughts we're thinking. Thousands, millions of thoughts enter and leave our minds as quickly as they enter it. By the choices that we're choosing and the decisions that we make, ultimately, our life is defined by these moments, especially how we perceive our world. Every choice you make can lead in different directions. One can be the shift towards choosing between being empowered, or the other can choose between disempowering yourself. We have to learn how to recognize that difference. If we're really connected to who we are, especially on a deeper level, understanding our wants, our desires, where we want to go in life, our outlooks, our views on partnership, then you know your passions. You know what's a priority and a goal for you. Especially if you're in that creative flow with your talents and you know the things that make you who you are. You're in control. You are empowered. If you're feeling energized and vibrant, especially when we're talking about getting involved in some sort of maybe DS style dynamic, whether it be MS or S&M or whatever the case may be, you're experiencing that inner knowing and you feel unstoppable, especially when you're connected to somebody else. At this moment, you're at the pinnacle of who you are. You're fully empowered. You're not living a dream any longer of what you want. And you're no longer kind of being aimlessly walking around and not understanding whether or not you're in control of your life. And I'm not talking about, obviously, one person willingly giving up control to somebody else. We do realize that through erotic power exchange, that is a given, but you're still in control of who you are. Now, if we go to the other side of this, if you're keeping yourself away from being your best, if you are constantly second-guessing yourself, if you don't think you're worthy, you're not standing up for yourself, if you're disconnected, stressed, feel anxious, you feel harm, pain, you're worried all the time, you're fearful, when we're at this end of the spectrum, we're more feeling like we're disempowered. And as you go through your days and you listen to your internal monologue that goes on inside of your own head, you have to start to sit down and examine your own thoughts. You have to pay attention to what you're feeling, what you're thinking. You have to learn to listen to your body and how it reacts to something and what your mind is saying. These are the little breadcrumbs that are being left behind so you can understand who you are. Allow the essence of who you are as a person to truly mean and be as fully in control of your own life as you possibly can. And that's the things that we have to start to understand, especially when we start mixing in the social media aspect. Because our sexual identity, we start creating this persona and all the important aspects of our sexual self. We then start looking at questions of, who am I sexually? Does my sexual identity really determine who I am? Do I really want to be spanked? Do I like giving the spankings? Do I want to have sex outdoors? Our sexual identity develops over our lifetime. It's constantly evolving. And that is characterized in that configuration of different sexual sub-identities, right? We might look at this as being monogamous, being polyamorous, being kinky, being heterosexual, just being vanilla. All of these expressions and explorations of our sexual identity occur in this analog and digital context and are related within the experiences of empowerment and disempowerment. So sometimes when we're sitting online and we're making our posts or throwing up our photos and we're really looking for some of that admiration, a lot of the times what we see is, at that point, a given empowerment of revealing our inner our inner identity. However, on the other side of it as well, when sometimes we are also vulnerable and prey in the digital and social media age to feedback. And if that feedback ends up becoming negative, then what ends up happening is we feel disempowered. We don't feel like we're at our best. We see our flaws. And let's be realistic for a moment. In a wonderful article I read the other day, somebody was discussing the fact that, all of these things, all of these photos, they're airbrushed. Hundreds of them are taken to get the perfect photo. When we finally decide to sign up to some sort of social media platform, for example, so let's just say if a lesbian woman registers on Grindr or even Tinder, they're creating a social media identity. They're creating their sexual identity. We see this on FetLife, or we see it on fetish.com or alt.com. The identity itself entails the creation for the person with photos and posts and their preferences, the ability to chat with others that gives them a way to connect with those that might be feeling the same things they are. When we have to manage all of these identities, it's relevant on a social level to understand that our identity helps us to express and explore that sexual identity through online and offline encounters with other members. Not all the time. Some people aren't out there to play at all. Some people aren't looking. Some people are just looking to share thoughts or explore photos or read the latest news or argue over politics while they're still doing it in a potentially, let's say, kinky fashion, right? I want to get all dressed up in my best dom suit and go out there and chat politics with my sadist friends. It does happen. Very rarely does it happen, but it does happen. But let's just say, for example, what if fetish.com or Instagram was hacked and all of that sensitive information was then accessed, misused by someone else? Now we've lost our empowerment, our control over who we are putting online. And we have now become disempowered from that relationship, that first connection to our sexual identity, because we've now experienced that feeling of vulnerability, that loss of privacy, and we've moved into an era of where somebody else can take that information and do whatever they want with it. More than likely, many countries around the world now have laws that prevent this. But in regard to when we start looking at how this empowerment and disempowerment really work, it becomes really situated in that process of our personal growth and increasing our control over our sexual life and all of our collective actions that we take along the way as we shape it. So we have to understand that everything we say, everything we do in that digital context starts to mirror who we really are. Sometimes it reveals deeper things than who we really are. We come to new realizations when we're starting to post things online. Things we never once thought were true, now they become true for us. In a digital context, it provides new opportunities for our sexual identity expression and exploration of including our sexual self-validation of who we are and what we really want to be. It allows us to grow inside of our community. So, for example, the larger fetish community, and find that support that we need and that solidarity for our sexual rights to not be shut out, so they can be explored and accepted by everybody else. And, that brings to mind in a couple of weeks here, or over the next couple of weeks, hopefully, I'm going to be having a talk with somebody out of Australia that brought to my attention about lactation, which kind of really fits here. Not so much that topic itself, but the fact that those who are into this kink, this fetish, are a little bit ostracized within the community. But the odd part about that is that when we join this community, we're looking for that sexual solidarity amongst all of our other users, not to be judged, to enjoy our kink, because that kink may not be my kink, but there's nothing wrong with that kink. So it was interesting to read, and amongst all of these people who are still evolving their sexual identities, who are still searching for that empowerment in their own lives, to spin their tales about how they felt that disempowerment, that disconnection, that loss of power, just because they enjoyed something outside of the norm. Well, the same could be said for probably those who are, wear adult diapers to work, or those who are involved in maybe DDLG play. So that's the daddy dom, little girl play, right? Or mommy dom, little boy play, whatever the case may be. We look for all these signs of empowerment when we look inside of our bigger groups so we can find and share the things that make us feel better. And that's when we're empowered, when we are connecting with others, it fills us with that sense of pride, like, okay, we're all the same. And then we start talking and working through these kinks. So for me, being a sadist, I know there's some irony in there because I'm highly empathetic. However, in my private life, it's something different. But that was kind of this point of this show, is I wanted to talk about psychology and the fetish and the BDSM world. Because I think about it this way, I'm a sadist. I have a submissive who is a masochist. And the reality is, I never feel more at my point than when we're involved in a scene. I'm feeling the height of that power with each thrusting blow or with each crack of the whip or whatever the case may be, just as it is for her. She feels that empowerment when she sees her bruises afterwards, or we're going through an intensive interrogation scene, or whatever the case may be. Because we're no longer in a world where we're being judged, where we can just share these experiences with one another or our friends, or in a public setting, say at a dungeon, or when we're giving a demonstration. It allows us to, again, all of this empowerment allows us to be who we are, to really understand our sexual selves. This becomes more highlighted now as we look and we introduce a lot of the times photography. And what's interesting about that empowerment from that side is that when we're at dungeons, obviously a lot of people don't want their faces shown. There's quite a few people on a lot of these social media platforms, Alt and FetLife and Fetish.com and a few others, that they're very happy sharing their face, and they're kind of telling the world, hey, I'm here, this is what I like, I'm out. And it's great. It's sex positive. And there shouldn't be any judgment. But even though we've seen like on places like Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, the discourse on body positivity, on sex toys, on female masturbation, on self-determining lifestyles in general getting better, we still stigmatize those who are within. We still try to take away or disempower those who are more sexually free because it's still outside the norm. This even comes, again, as I mentioned before, comes with inside of the community itself. When you have others judging from the outside and making comments that aren't overly knowledgeable in particular subject matter. So they'll start making claims of harm or abuse, and that may not necessarily be the case. So, for example, I know of somebody who was making claims that a submissive was being harmed at the hands of their dominant. But what they did not know was the submissive was an extreme masochist into blood play and needle play and edge play. And the dominant was an extreme sadist, and he was into these types of play as well. And they happened to share a couple of these intimate photos of themselves because they felt good. They hadn't done this before. They're active on social media, but they don't really give the next level of who they are from behind the scenes to that public persona. But they took a chance. And while the majority of the comments were positive, the one comment from somebody who even self-admittedly said had no real idea about their lifestyle, didn't understand the desires for someone to be a sadist, didn't understand the desires for someone to be a masochist and why they would allow themselves to be quote-unquote abused, which is not the case at all, took away from this moment of their empowerment, took away this moment of their ultimate, it didn't take their control away, but it takes a light of what they've done and how they showed that control of what they posted. And now they've gone back to not showing anything because the judgment and the fear from the community of those speaking out without all the information that's readily available, which they're not overly educated in the subject matter, caused them to feel disempowered. It caused his submissive to be upset and become angry and to strip her of sharing that lovely moment between the two of them. Now, these are exceptions. These aren't the rules. For the most part, we find that our sexual identities that we create online, that we share with the world, are overwhelmingly, about 70% to 80% of the time, are met with wide adoration. So we start to feel, other people think the way we think. We receive positive feedback. People like our posts. They will click the little heart emojis and so on and so forth. And they'll develop these bonds. And they really start to connect on a level and an identity for themselves that makes them feel better. So the biggest problem that I see when we're talking about the kink and the fetish identities overall, though, we are having to understand that we challenge the normalized feelings and thoughts of the social world and the vanilla world through our erotic activities and objects or implements that are beyond the normal of sexual interests and activities, especially outside when we get into the spectrum of BDSM and certain other fetishes that don't necessarily fall under the BDSM umbrella. And these representations in the digital context sometimes help younger people come to terms with things that they like, things they want to explore, things they want to go into and maybe try or steer clear from completely. For example, while I think watching somebody do needle play is beautiful, and I think it's highly creative, or shibari rope, two vastly different things under the fetish umbrella, under the kink umbrella. They're not for me, but I can still appreciate their beauty because I know that if I have really nothing to say, but I decide to add a negative comment about the blood or how long it took to tie somebody up, I'm taking away from their moment. I'm reducing their overall feelings and putting them more into a negative state. And interestingly enough, research from Europe has even showed that newer generations of people coming into the BDSM and the fetish community, they're starting to become more flexible and fluid with their kink identity, especially when it comes to expressing themselves online and even offline. They're no longer afraid not to talk about who they are. Maybe through the wide community or the wider community as a whole, we're starting to get to a point where BDSM still isn't this, oh, you just tie people up in chains and beat them, which was a perception I even still had over 20 years ago before I really got into the community. I really thought that that's what it was all about with some, well, I didn't even know it was degradation back then, but now I do. However, now, in this one study, compared to earlier generations of BDSM practitioners, people are much more open. They're willing to talk about it. They're not willing to go into hushed tones in the corner or find the furthest table away from everybody so they can have their conversations about who they are, their sexual proclivities, the things that they like, the things that they want, and the things that make them happy as a person and who they are and how they're overall represented inside of the community, what they want and feel out of a dynamic, how they want to feel empowered by their partner. And that's not just the submissive either. Dominants as well need to feel that sense of empowerment. And empowerment doesn't just come from control or the power exchange. It does also come from the connection. So we need to understand in this era, in a digital technological era that we're currently in mankind or in humankind, in the age of the internet and with high social media use across all platforms, our digital identities, our sexual identities have become ubiquitous to who we are in real life. While that exploration and expression of our sexual self in these digital contexts is linked with multiple opportunities to empower us to feel better, particularly for those in the more marginalized communities or the more marginalized sexual identities, which are now getting to live their more authentic selves. And there's nothing wrong with that. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I really got into the scene, or 20 years ago, I remember going to my first BDSM private party. I wasn't concerned with somebody who was cross-dressing. I wasn't concerned with the lesbian couples. None of those things, nobody from any different area or walk of life, it didn't matter if they were Hispanic, if they were black, it didn't matter. We were there for one reason, our love of the community. It gave us that platform, and it gave us BDSM, the fetish community, gave us that empowerment to come together and enjoy those things together. And now we get to explore that more so through the digital era. However, there is the other side. There becomes those risks of disempowerment. As our digital identities become multifaceted, so too is the phenomenon that comes with it. And we have to address those risks when they arise. We need to understand that even though there's a technical social side and the science behind it all, we have to understand that sometimes we're going to be faced with those who are overwhelmingly trying to be negative, trying to bring someone down because they want to make themselves feel better. We have to learn how to identify that so that we don't fall prey when we're expressing who we are, trying to be the most authentic version of ourselves, and to be brought down to another level of someone who can't do that or doesn't want to do that or isn't even there for that. We just put these countermeasures in place. We need to understand that over time, as social media and sex education get more and more intermixed, that we're on the precipice for a better life of understanding what turns us on, what makes us feel good, what type of partner we want in our life. Whether you're monogamous or polyamorous or you're asexual or you just want to be by yourself, but you want to be around all of these other people. While we continue and work and strive to finding those things in our life to make us feel empowered, to make us feel our best self, learn to just be open and honest with yourself. If you're inside of a relationship and you're not happy, you're feeling that disempowerment, you're feeling that disconnection, have a conversation not only with yourself, but with your partner. Are you really not happy inside of your relationship? Is it a problem you can fix? More often than not, when I do couples counseling, for example, people are coming to me when they're already in crisis. Don't wait till you're in crisis to regain the happiness you feel, the joy that you feel, that empowerment that you felt in your relationship in the beginning, or even the couple of years in. Don't wait until you're at the moment, you're so disillusioned, you're so disconnected, you've reached the point of your sexual identity has completely been disempowered, that you no longer know who you are. Because then at that point, it's a very long, arduous, uphill struggle to get back to where we were as a person, and especially reconnecting where that person is in the digital and social media age. So I'd like to hear what your kind of thoughts about that on empowerment, especially in the digital era, or disempowerment, and maybe some of your stories or your things that you've run into, or really some of your connections that have really made you feel at your best. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.